Hey everyone, we've made it to the Sleepers of Avarrach in our full set review for Revelations. Going to be giving these cards a spice rating 1 through 5, where 5 being the spiciest card, I want to put it into a new deck right away, and 1 being I may not put it into a deck at all, and there's some in between based off of, how quickly I want to build these decks. And of course, this is an opinion, so it's not related to the power of the card necessarily. And also, I want to hear other people's opinions in case maybe I'm not thinking of a cool way I could be using these cards, or maybe you just play the game differently than I do. So we're going to just jump right into it with our commons. We have Apothena's Bloodfly, and this is an insectoid, so I'm going to go ahead and give this 3 spice. Hey folks, I wanted to mention here that while initially recording this, I was not aware that the competitive community has come to a strong consensus that this card may be extremely powerful. And although I'm not going to adjust my spice rating here because it's based off of how excited I am to use the card, as opposed to how powerful it is, I thought I really ought to mention it, if only to make sure I don't get roasted on a spit for not giving it a higher spice rating. Because I'm excited to see more support for the insectoids, and this card seems totally solid as a card that hits the board hard, potentially removes an enemy character with that poison effect, really applies quite a bit of pressure, and yeah, overall really solid card. But I think at this point I've said this countless times, but this is kind of the potatoes cards for your deck, that I think that this card is not the reason that you're excited to play the Insectoids deck or excited to play a different deck. It feels more like this card just is a quality of life improvement for those decks. So I will definitely be putting it in an Insectoid deck when I get around to it, but I'm not in a big rush to play Insectoids because of this card specifically. All right, let's move on to Buried Below. So 1-cost ability creates a Risen of Avarrach in your graveyard and then puts the top 2 cards of your deck into your graveyard. This is a 4 spice for me. I think this card's really easy to include in a lot of decks. I think it's also maybe one of our most efficient cards in terms of putting cards into your graveyard. Reason being is that some of these cards that put cards into your graveyard feel like they don't do much else for their cost, whereas this guarantees that you get that Risen of Avarrach. So seems really solid and seems like it could go in a whole bunch of decks. It's 1 purity, so it supports decks other than just core sleepers decks. But I think even in core sleepers decks, we don't have that many 1-drops that are very strong to play on turn 1, and this falls into that category. I think this actually is very good to play on turn 1, that getting that Risen of Avarrach in your graveyard as fast as possible, and then maybe you get a couple other cards in there that you want in your graveyard as well. Very nice. So totally solid card. Big fan of it. And next, we have Quarantine Break, and I think this might be a 1 spice for me, if I'm being honest. And the reason is that we already have some sleepers cards that make a bunch of 2/2 undead characters. This one makes more. This makes 8. And it also has recall 5, so you can do this twice, or you can play it from your graveyard at a discount if you get this into your graveyard by discarding it. But that exhausted for 2 turns is a really, really significant dampener on how excited I am about this card. That we have the ability to create 5 2/2 zombies at a pretty significant discount of 2. And the ability to use those characters the following turn is important. That this card's not doing it for me. I think I would be more excited about the card if maybe if the cost was lower, if I'm being honest. Like this card just feels like it's asking a lot of the player who puts it in their deck in terms of the amount of time that it takes for your investment to pay off, and the the actual payoff is you get 3 more undead characters than the alternative. I suppose this is 1 purity, so you can try it in some other decks, but up until somebody proves that to me that this card has a fun use, I'm really, really fixated on the high cost and the exhausted for 2 turns. Just want to be honest about that. Okay. Next, Amalgam of Flesh. And this card is a card that reads to me as a card that is going to be a really good experience for the draft format, but we don't have the draft format yet. So for that reason, this is getting 2 spice. And just to review the card real quick, when you deploy it, you can sacrifice 2 other deployed characters you control, and if you do, you kill target enemy deployed character. So I think that this guy's just a huge bomb. He's a huge beefcake, and killing something of your choice that is in any zone other than command zone, very potent effect. But I really do think that this card is intended to serve its function as a card that rounds out the drafting experience, gives sleepers a high cost, high impact card that is relatively low rarity. I'm not sure that this card is really intended to get you excited to play it in a constructed format. All right, next, Lifeless Battlefield. This is going to be 4 spice for me. It's a location for sleepers, double sleepers, and when an enemy character enters the deployed area, it becomes poisoned, taking 3 damage at the end of each turn. Card seems nuts, and it's asymmetrical. This affects only your opponent, which for some people might be, of course it's asymmetrical, but that effect seems really kind of nutty against decks that run really small characters, and it's totally solid against a bunch of other decks. So, huge fan of the card. I think it is a card that I would be very tempted to try in almost any deck that has at least 2 sleepers purity, just to see how effective it is. All right. Next, we have Avarrach Mastermind. And Avarrach Mastermind, for me, is a 5 spice. And we've talked about this card before, but it lets you choose a card in your graveyard, and when Avarrach Mastermind attacks, you put copies of that card into your graveyard, and if you have 20 or more cards in your graveyard, you get 2 copies instead. I think that the flexibility that this card has in terms of how you want to use it, it's only 1 sleeper's purity, so you can be targeting sleepers cards if you want to go deep into the sleepers faction and target those cards that do stuff from the graveyard, or if you're in other factions, you can leverage some cards that are already very potent from the graveyard. I think, again, I talked about this card before, but Infested Abomination is the first card that comes to mind, but it's not the last card that comes to mind. So it'll be curious to see how people want to use this, and I'm definitely going to be giving it a shot myself. And our last card, Fetid Intrusion. This, for me, is a 5 spice card, because when I play sleepers, especially triple sleepers, I have always had a lot of frustration playing against overseers, especially, that really strong, low-cost flying characters can kind of ruin the fun for a triple sleepers deck before you really get to enable your game plan. So that alone gets me really excited about this card, but it's also just really cool and might be one of the most powerful removal spells we've ever seen. That it's low cost, it's very efficient, and the ability to play characters that you've killed with it is really amazing. Huge fan of this card, and again, we are not focusing on the power of the cards here, but I'm tempted to say that this might be the best card in the set. Just going to be transparent about that. Like, I think that I think this card's crazy. All right. That wraps it up for sleepers. And in the next video, we will be talking about our Overseers of Solace.